Welcome back to World Gone Weird, folks, where we try to make sense of, well, the senseless, or at least laugh at it. Because what else can you do?
I'm hoping we can do more than laugh, Sarah. Maybe shed some light, find some solutions, or at least a glimmer of hope in all this weirdness.
Optimist? Always gotta have one, like a designated driver for our sanity.
I'd rather drive myself, thank you very much. But I'm with Otto. Laughter's a good start, but we gotta dig deeper. So, what are we wrestling with today, folks?
Well, today's serving of weirdness seems particularly potent. We have Trump, as usual, testing the very fabric of, shall we say, democracy, according to that AP article. And then there's the whole Hamas-Israel ceasefire situation crumbling faster than a poorly made sandcastle. So plenty to unpack.
Trump testing the limits sounds about right. What's he done now that has everyone's hair on fire?
Oh, the usual. Pardoning capital attackers, placing loyalists in key positions, declaring himself the federal law, basically running the country like his own personal fiefdom.
Long live the king. Apparently, the White House X account posted that. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Is he auditioning for a reality show where he plays a benevolent dictator? Because I would watch that train wreck.
Hold on a second, pardoning January 6 people? That's a bold move. Sends a real message about accountability, doesn't it?
A message that's completely undermining the rule of law. That's the concern. These actions, even if legal, are setting dangerous precedents.
Exactly. It's about the normalization of what were once considered unthinkable actions. As Brendan Nyhan put it, it's like an elected authoritarian playbook. It's crude but effective, especially when amplified by social media echo chambers.
Social media, right. Everything gets amplified these days. But is it really authoritarian, or is it just really strong executive action? I mean, isn't that what some people voted for? A leader who gets things done.
Getting things done without regard for checks and balances, for established norms, for the very foundation of our democratic institutions. That's not getting things done. That's dismantling the system.
Yeah, but let's be real. The system's been looking a little rickety for a while now. Maybe a bit of a teardown is what it needs. Though, I'd prefer it wasn't done by a guy who tweets more than my grandma.
The problem, as I see it, isn't the system itself, but the erosion of trust in institutions, fueled by misinformation and amplified by algorithms designed for engagement, not truth. And the data doesn't lie. The more polarized information people consume, the less likely they are to participate in constructive civic engagement.
That's it exactly. The algorithms are weaponizing our own biases. They feed us what we want to hear, reinforcing existing beliefs and creating these echo chambers where dissenting voices are silenced.
But isn't that what all media does to some extent? Catering to an audience? Fox News says the same about CNN. CNN says the same about Fox. Everyone's got their angle.
Yes, but the algorithmic personalization takes it to a whole new level. It's not just choosing a news source. It's having a reality curated specifically for you, reinforcing your existing biases and isolating you from opposing viewpoints. The data clearly shows a correlation between heavy social media use and increased political polarization.
And that polarization leads to decreased voter turnout, especially among younger demographics. They feel disenfranchised, like their voice doesn't matter because the system is rigged or controlled by these powerful forces.
Which, let's be honest, it kind of is. I mean, who has time to sift through all the BS online? It's easier to just tune out and watch cat videos. And the algorithm rewards you for it, trapping you in the cycle.
Okay, so let's say the algorithms are evil. What's the solution? Ban social media? Give everyone a lobotomy to erase their biases?
The solution isn't censorship, but media literacy, teaching critical thinking skills, encouraging diverse information sources, and demanding transparency from tech companies about their algorithms. Because right now it is a black box of information.
Yes, and pushing for policies that prioritize facts, not engagement in the design of these algorithms, maybe even government regulation, though that's always a tricky slope.
Oh, government regulation? That's like asking a pyromaniac to put out a fire. They'll just find a way to make it burn better.
There is something to be said for government regulation on this, but it can cause major pushback. I mean, should they start regulating what people can say?
That is the line, isn't it? It's not about regulating speech. It's about regulating the systems that amplify certain types of speech, often at the expense of informed discourse. It is a bit of a tightrope walk, though.
But back to Trump and this AP article. Did you see the part about him siding with Russia in talks to end the war in Ukraine? What is that about?
Oh, that's just Trump doing Trump things. He probably thinks he can broker a deal and get a hotel built in Moscow out of it. Or maybe he just likes Putin's strongman vibe. Who knows?
Or maybe he sees a path to de-escalation that the rest of the world is too stubborn to see. It doesn't mean he agrees with Putin, just that he's willing to talk.
Willing to talk while berating Zelensky in the Oval Office? That's hardly conducive to productive diplomacy. And again, the data on similar historical events suggests that such erratic behavior from a leader often leads to miscalculations and escalations.
Exactly. That CNN article paints a horrifying picture of that meeting. Trump and Vance lecturing Zelensky about gratitude, threatening to cut off aid. It's appalling. What are we doing?
It's like a badly written reality show episode. I'm surprised there wasn't a dramatic musical cue when Trump said, "You don't have the cards."
It's not just a reality show. It's a dangerous game with real-world consequences. That shouting match is being spun by Russian state media as a sign of Western weakness, further emboldening Putin and destabilizing the region.
Okay, so the optics are terrible. I'll grant you that. But maybe there's a strategy behind it that we're not seeing. Maybe Trump's trying to shock Zelensky into a more realistic negotiating position.
A realistic negotiating position that involves ceding territory to Russia? That's not a realistic negotiating position, that's appeasement.
And even if there is some Machiavellian strategy at play, the damage to the US's credibility on the world stage is immense. Allies are already questioning our commitment to NATO, to democracy itself. That's a price that's difficult to quantify, but potentially catastrophic.
Meanwhile, Ukraine is caught in the middle, dealing with a war, a potential cutoff of aid, and now being publicly dressed down by their biggest ally. Talk about a bad week.
And the Ukrainian people are rallying behind Zelensky, according to that Guardian article. They see him as defending their honor, their sovereignty, against Trump's pressure. That's powerful.
Rallying now maybe because he's been publicly attacked. But what about before? Was everyone in Ukraine thrilled with Zelensky's leadership? Were there no internal critiques, no dissenting voices? I doubt it.
Regardless of internal opinions, the optics of a US president publicly undermining a wartime leader are devastating, especially when combined with Russia's disinformation campaigns aimed at eroding trust in the Ukrainian government.
And this all ties back to social media, doesn't it? The way these events are framed, the narratives that are pushed, the echo chambers that reinforce existing biases, it's all contributing to a climate of mistrust and division.
Absolutely. Social media is like a global town square where everyone's screaming at each other, and the loudest, most outrageous voices get amplified. It's a recipe for disaster.
It's not just screaming, it's a curated cacophony, designed to keep you engaged regardless of the cost to your understanding of the world. And what about the information that may not even make it to other countries due to it being blocked?
So we have a president who's pushing the limits of executive power, a war in Ukraine being potentially undermined by diplomatic missteps, and social media amplifying all the negativity. What else is new?
Well, there's the crumbling Gaza ceasefire for starters, Hamas rejecting Israel's request to extend the first phase, another potential powder keg about to explode.
Yes, the never-ending story. Except this one's not a feel-good adventure. It's more like a horror movie with no ending in sight.
The NPR and Al Jazeera articles both highlight the breakdown in negotiations, with each side accusing the other of bad faith. It's a classic case of intractable conflict, fueled by historical grievances and amplified by, you guessed it, social media.
Hamas says Israel wants to get the hostages back and then resume the war. Israel says, well, what does Israel say? Exactly. Besides, we're ready to extend the framework.
Israel wants security guarantees, the release of all hostages, and the dismantling of Hamas, demands that are frankly unrealistic, especially considering the current power dynamics and the deep-seated animosity.
And Hamas, understandably, wants a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza and a commitment to end the war. Demands that Israel is unlikely to concede, especially after the October 7th attacks. So we're at an impasse, fueled on both sides by trauma, fear, and a cycle of violence.
It's like watching two scorpions in a jar, convinced that the only way to survive is to sting each other to death. And social media is the jar, amplifying their rage and preventing any chance of escape.
And the humanitarian crisis in Gaza continues to worsen. People are starving, displaced, traumatized, and the ceasefire, which offered a brief glimmer of hope, is now on the verge of collapse.
The Al Jazeera article notes reports of ceasefire violations, military incursions, and obstruction of aid. It is difficult to see a clear picture, but it is very clear that trust in the region is fractured.
So what now? Do we just throw up our hands and say there's nothing we can do? Is that the solution? Just give up and wait for the inevitable explosion?
Absolutely not. We have to keep pushing for dialogue, for diplomacy, for a just and lasting peace. We have to support humanitarian efforts, hold both sides accountable for violations of international law, and challenge the narratives that perpetuate the conflict.
Easier said than done, but I guess doing something is better than doing nothing, even if that something is just screaming into the void of social media.
The first step is recognizing the limitations and biases inherent in our information sources, particularly on social media. We have to cultivate critical thinking, seek out diverse perspectives, and resist the urge to fall into echo chambers, because that polarization benefits no one but those who seek to maintain power through division.
Yes, and we have to hold our leaders accountable. Demand that they prioritize diplomacy over conflict, compassion over political gain, and the long-term well-being of humanity over short-term self-interest.
Accountability, huh? Sounds good in theory. But how do you actually do that in a world where everyone's got their own version of the truth and their own army of social media bots to back them up?
By demanding transparency, by supporting independent journalism, and by engaging in civil discourse, even with those we disagree with. It's a long, arduous process, but it's the only way to break free from the cycles of misinformation and polarization.
Okay, so we're advocating for critical thinking, media literacy, and holding our leaders accountable. Sounds like a good start, even if it feels like trying to drain the ocean with a teaspoon.
Every drop counts. We have to keep pushing for a more just, equitable, and peaceful world, even in the face of overwhelming challenges, because if we give up hope, then the weirdness truly wins.
And remember, folks, question everything, including what we've said here today. Do your own research, draw your own conclusions, and never stop seeking the truth, even when it's uncomfortable.
Well said. And with that, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us on this descent into the weird. Until next week, stay skeptical, stay informed, and try not to get sucked into the algorithm.
And stay hopeful, even a little bit.
And stay driving your own car and thinking for yourselves.